President Obama, as you know, Cliff, we have dropped, I think, about 1,900 or been involved in 1,900 bombing sorties. They haven't all necessarily been, I think, executed by American forces, but certainly at our direction.
That's not war, though.
No, apparently,
sort of, playing, exercising.
Kinetic energy, I think, is what we call it. And we have been, this is a 6-month old military campaign against ISIS or ISIL, depending on what your preference is. And this is relevant because under the War Powers Act of 1973, the president was supposed to have gone to Congress in October, as far as I can tell, and basically said, either I'm ceasing this kinetic activity or kinetic force or whatever you want to call it, or I'm going to go forward with it with your authorization. He didn't do that, but now he's gone to Congress, I guess, seeking a new authorization of the use of military force.
Yeah, well, that's all very true. I wonder if he was thinking maybe it made sense to wait until there was a Republican Congress who are torn between a Republican Senate, torn between their hatred of him and of all things Obama, but also they like to blow stuff up on the other side. So maybe it was more of a feeling that once the Republicans, kind of like some other things, were controlling the Senate, this would be an easier lift. Clearly, there's some. But obviously, there's some on the left who are now, which makes a lot of sense to me, don't want to do this, and of course we have some on the right who would give President Bush the power to literally nuke every other country, but it's Obama, so they have to find something wrong, and I guess he's not asking for enough power now or something of that sort.
Well, this is what's interesting about this. And I think as far as the polling goes, Democrats seem to be as excited, if not more so, than even the Republicans. And like you say, I think the Republicans are not excited because, of course, who wants to give a Marxist, socialist, Kenyanist?
Excited? Yeah, you're saying excited about going to war?
Yeah, and
no, I'm talking about I guess where I'm splitting up our elite people that represent us in D.C. versus everyday voters. And you're right, they are excited to go to war, which is there's a lesson in there somewhere about our country, isn't there?
Yeah, indeed, and so just to be clear that people understand what the president is seeking. He is seeking authority to wage a military campaign that has an end to it. Only 3 years of authorization. Only 3 years of authorization. It does not authorize, and there's a quote: enduring offensive ground combat operations. Ground combat would be limited to special ops and maybe defensive operations. It would
Clint Eastwood movies too.
Exactly, and it would sunset the 2002 authorization for use of military force that was used to essentially to attack Iraq. It would not sunset the 2001 authorization of military force, which is the one that basically says we have an enduring war forever on Al-Qaeda and its associate forces, and this associate forces has been interpreted and as being so loose that it actually has been used to justify the attacks on ISIS up to this point, because even though they're enemies of Al-Qaeda.
Right. That they can use that. We could, if we wanted to next week, we could use that to go against Basque separatists.
That's funny because that's what Michael and I were saying yesterday as well.
Were you? Yeah.
Honestly,
they'll find a way. It's sort of. That's the thing. You have to always look for those clauses in there like that. Again, as you pointed out, ISIS broke away from Al-Qaeda over their certain disagreements on crazy, and have been enemies. Although I guess at times they've gotten back together, they've gotten the band back together and fought again. It's like any of these other things. But Boko Haram, you could say that this would justify that, and before you know it, we could have a couple 100,000 ground troops in Africa. Now I'm not saying that's going to happen, there isn't enough oil in Africa, but or at least the parts we would go to. But I mean, in all seriousness, I mean, there's this thing is written so that it could justify endless war, which many of us thought about back then.
Yeah, and so we have a situation where, and this is sort of like the, I don't know. I mean, I think it's the exercise. This is what's annoying about this, right? Is that the value that I would see as someone who is a bit of an institutionalist in being able to say to, well, at the very least, I'm happy that President Obama is going to Congress and seeking authorization, because at least we have some process here. But with that said, they have already sort of broken this process by coming 6 months as opposed to, I think it was 90 days that they were supposed to come. They were supposed to come to Congress in October. They have justified the military action against ISIS on, one, the 2001 authorization of military force, which again is so broad that it would include this. Two, the 2002 authorization of military force, which they would just basically replace with one that supposedly sunsets in 3 years, but that's up to President Cruz or Clinton, I guess.
But you've still got the 2001,
Indeed.
So it doesn't really matter what they do with this,
right?
Because that one they can justify anything. And I agree with you. To be clear, I just think that there clearly have been many times we've needed along the way to improve upon our democracy for huge errors in judgment. But back when the Constitution was signed, but many of the sort of traditions and customs, the norms, let's call them, that have governed policy outside of just obviously there's law, there's a legislation, but just the norms. These are the very things that the Republican Party has assaulted, and I think that has been very bad for our democracy. And so I think that his going to Congress is a good idea. I agree with you. The problem here is that none of it really means much anyhow. But, I mean, as you pointed out, right, they can use this other thing as justification, the 2001 authorization, but also there's the perfect example of how sort of a creeping culture, first by not declaring war in Korea, and then, what's a police action and what's not, and how long, and all these kinds of things, which they thought they solved with the War Powers Act, but clearly it hasn't been solved. Because for one, one of the few times I don't agree with conservatives because, for sneezing too much, they would impeach Obama. But I would agree with those who actually are consistent and sit and look at things that way and would say that he broke the law with that. He did. I don't know what else to say. I think it's pretty clear.
And I mean, look, my concern is that, and I felt that there was sort of a defensive posture in Iraq was one thing in terms of, helping out with the Yazidis and perhaps also making sure that ISIS didn't get a hold of the Mosul Dam. But the idea of 3 more years of sort of, it's so ripe for mission creep, frankly.
Oh, my God.
And, people should keep this in mind. The next president may be Hillary Clinton, who was in favor of the first Iraq war. Or the next president might be Jeb Bush, who was one of the original signatories to the Project for a New American Century, which was essentially founded on the premise that we should have gone into Baghdad and occupied that entire country, essentially. And so
basically calling his own dad a wimp.
Yeah, I mean, basically.
And then there's, as you point out, it could be President Cruz, who I could see riding a missile into Baghdad, waving a cowboy hat.
And so, what President Obama is doing, and I understand the idea that, I don't want to handcuff the next president. They'll have a year and a half, I guess, or so, to extend their war in Iraq. But, I mean, this is just, I don't know. It just seems to me.
And also we were supposed to be, getting to a point where we were done with this, right? Mm-hmm. And yes, the Iraq War was the stupidest, most criminal. I mean, what we did there, you have to search long and hard to come up with any other policies. I think slavery would be one, but there aren't many that have been dumber and caused more damage in this country's history. but and we're still feeling all of the after effects of that, and we will for a long time, which is why many of us didn't think we should have ever have gone in. But it's one thing I agreed with you when there are certain minority populations that we can protect. I think the world has a responsibility to do that, at least in some way, shape, or form. I'm not saying necessarily putting troops on the ground. I'm just saying doing what you can. And I think that there are some things that, but when it comes to sort of saying in a manner of speaking, we're re-upping this war. Well, you know what? Here's what happens if we destroy ISIS. Make up another name, and that's the next group.
Right.
Because this doesn't go away. It's not. I mean, there's actual real war where you fight against countries who have interests, and you make it painful enough for them that they say, okay, we give up, and that war is over. And then there's occupations, and that's what this is. And whether it's because some of the people there who are poorer or less educated have been sucked in to a movement that they believe makes them something bigger than themselves, whether it's because somebody accidentally bombed somewhere and killed their family members, so they're angry. These are the kinds of things that will keep going on. Radical religious beliefs aren't going to disappear when we kill everybody in ISIS. If we could even do that, mistakes aren't going to disappear in warfare. They'll probably increase. It's just a never-ending game.
And in fact, the Onion headline, I think, I don't know if it was today, was Obama vows to split ISIS into dozens of extremist splinter groups.
Exactly. Right, and who's to say, one guy? I mean, this happened. I remember with all the different warlords, some of who would be with the Taliban one day in Afghanistan, and they'd fight. They get angry. There's so many shifting coalitions, and it's about it's this for the same reasons anything like this would happen. Somebody interprets the religion differently, or somebody's angry and wasn't getting enough of the profits or the guns, any number of things can lead to this. And so the whole point is, all we can do is try to protect minority populations and contain it. But I don't understand what the thoughts are here that we defeat ISIS. We need a strategy to defeat ISIS. And this guy keeps saying there is none. You can't defeat them the way you can't defeat Al Qaeda. This is just such stupid thinking. You can set them back. You can destroy, and kill their top people who are who have the funds or who are the brains behind it or whatever. I'm not saying you can't hurt a movement, and I'm not saying there shouldn't be some effort in some way, shape, or form. But this whole sort of idea that, all right, we scoop up ISIS and it's over. Didn't we learn that from the same rhetoric about Al Qaeda and other groups? It just doesn't end.
No. It is an ongoing parade of this stuff. But interesting dynamic to the extent that I guess the Republican. I don't see how they the Republicans can resist voting for this, because it's going to allow for some authorization. But it is there's so much kabuki involved in this that it's hard to sort of get a sense of what's relevant. I mean, the administration already says we have the authority to do this, I don't know that anybody's challenging. The Republicans seem to be saying he's not doing enough, but we're not going to give him authority to do anything.
Right. And that's what I mean. They're just lays bare that they've got nothing except for to attack him. And again, for some of them like Lindsey Graham, where would be the point where enough would be enough?
Well, yes. I'm not sure where Lindsey has come out on this, but I guess we'll find out shortly.